Just when I think the world has reached peak stupidity, somehow it always manages to go even lower.
If NASA says it's too hot to go to the sun, then why don't we go at night when the sun turns off?
Surely that can't be real. Please someone prove that's trolling. Anyway, brace yourself. I'm talking about the Rings of Power again. It's not my fault. I can't help it, okay? I'm hooked. Like a moth to a flame, I'm jonesing for more Rings of Power, and they're just going to leave me hanging for another 2 years to get a measly 8 more episodes of my favourite LOL pinata. And the makers of the Rings of Power bring to the work of Tolkien what that young lady brings to the world of astrophysics. There surely can't genuinely be real people that think the sun turns off. Why do I get the impression that if you played peekaboo with this woman, she'd get frightened by your face disappearing?
My mighty heart is breaking.
And yes, this may be a desperate attempt to talk about something so I don't have to watch Agatha all along.
It's been described to me that Agatha is the gayest project Marvel has ever done.
And what's wrong with him? Why was he so monstrously happy with that idea, that he's talking like that and clawing his hands like a tiny T-Rex? You see what I've been reduced to? I'm not even sure how we've ended up in this state. As much of a missed opportunity I thought the Rings of Power was, and for me it was a big missed opportunity. The most glaring offences of the show for me include having a character be stabbed twice through the chest in episode 7 and left bleeding out on the ground while a murderous horde of orcs charged at him, then the camera cuts away and the same guy just reappears in the next episode and he's somehow fine. As far as I can tell, he just came back to life. What happened off camera? Do the writers even know? The last we saw the character Isildur last season, he got hit with an exploding volcano and a burning house fell on him. This season, he's just now stuck to a wall in a spider cave without a scratch on him, and he gets rescued by his horse Beric. So, what happened off camera? I have no idea. Could the writers just not be bothered to write away that this happened? And as an exact mirror of that, we have the character Bronwyn, who was fine when we saw her last season. Then when this season started, we learned that she got sick and keeled over off camera because the actress decided she didn't want to be in the Rings of Power anymore. The use of plot armour in this show is ridiculous. How can the audience get invested if you can't even rely on whether a character is alive or not? I can't think of many other things that are quite this badly written. The movie Troll 2 is more coherent than this.
This is my house.
Can you imagine this writing in the film Alien? If they'd cut the chestburster scene out with John Hurt and then later Ripley has to ask Yaphet Kotto where John Hurt went and where the big genital themed xenomorph came from. It's like Hollywood has forgotten how to write. Or perhaps the inverse. You see the chestburster scene and then later John Hurt just turns up again and he's fine. The Rings of Power is also not a good adaptation of Tolkien for me because in the Rings of Power, the Dark Lord Sauron has not made the One Ring yet Isildur is in the show who from Tolkien's timeline of events in the Return of the King book won't be born for over 1600 years after the One Ring has been made. And as bad as I think the show did in adapting Tolkien, I didn't imagine it could get worse and then it did. Because I've been reading multiple interviews with J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, the showrunners of the Rings of Power, and listening to them talk about their own show somehow makes it even more incompetent. I say that because there were areas where I'd given them the benefit of the doubt as to what they could have been thinking, and they've now ruined even that by confirming what their intentions were, and it's even stupider than I expected. But they genuinely seem to think that what they produced is comparable to the Godfather films. Yes, really. They're under the impression that Adar, the leader of the Orcs story arc, is like Michael Corleone in The Godfather. Yeah, bless them. They think they're like Francis Ford Coppola with this show. But before I get on to the interviews, I've been re-watching some old shows. I re-watched Babylon 5 again, and in 1 year, they dropped 22 episodes that ran from May to October in 1994. Season 1 finished on October the 3rd, and they were back on again with Season 2 by November the 2nd of 1994. It wasn't even gone for a month. Never mind the 2 full years that The Rings of Power takes between seasons, and it was better written than The Rings of Power, a lot better. Despite having a fraction of the budget, I think I can argue, Babylon 5 had worse actors than The Rings of Power 2. because although I kind of love the cast in Babylon 5, not many of them tend to get brought up as being fantastic actors. I have a warm place in my heart for Bruce Boxleitner, but he doesn't tend to get mentioned at the Oscars, does he? And the last nomination for Best Actor is Bruce Boxleitner for the film Transmorphers. Not Transformers, mind, Transmorphers, and if you don't know what that is, you're better off for it. Because heaven help me, I watched that film and I doubt I will ever hear someone say the greatest night of my life was seeing Bruce Boxleitner in Hamlet. Or Walter Koenig's performance genuinely brought me to tears.
Excuse me, we are looking for nuclear vessels.
Now say nuclear vessels.
No.
The Rings of Power is going to hit even more problems at the rate they're going because they have multiple people in it who are supposed to be ageless elves, with the slight issue that your actors are aging. And it's going to be increasingly noticeable if your 5-season show is running for a full decade, isn't it? So the interview with the showrunners was in Deadline, where I can barely make it through a paragraph without something terrible coming up, because, much like me, the interviewer has questions about who the character Dark Wizard is, being played by Kieran Hines, and much like me, thinks the show is signalling that he is Saruman, Christopher Lee in the Jackson films. And what did Patrick McKay reply to this? Well, he supposedly replied,
"First of all, I would just reflect that I think your assessment of the Dark Wizard being Sauron might be a fairly astute observation."
Not Saruman, mind. Sauron. He said Sauron. From this, the interviewer asked, is Dark Wizard Saruman? And Patrick McKay said, astute observation. Maybe he is Sauron. Half the time I can barely tell if the showrunners misspoke, made a mistake, or Deadline just don't bother with small details like employing editors or spell checking. I also found this reply shocking for what he said next, because he talks about the character The Stranger being Gandalf, saying,
"You need a wizard in there to make it really feel like Middle-earth. The question is, which one?" So he comes to Middle-earth, and at first he doesn't know who he is. And it was a journey discovery for him.
Not a journey of discovery, mind, a journey discovery.
And in some ways also for us at first. We just knew he was a wizard. And then as the pieces really started to come together, he said he's a wizard who is found by halflings. A lot of things started coming together that really sort of pointed us to this wizard should be Gandalf.
This explains to me why Babylon 5 could do 22 episodes a year and the Rings of Power has to take 2 years break in between seasons. It's because the Rings of Power doesn't even know what their own story is going to be. They're clearly just making it up as they go along, and this is why the story is so disjointed. Watching Babylon 5, they're doing setups for something that's going to happen at the end of season 4, in the first episode. You can't do foreshadowing of future events if you don't know where your own story's going. In this case, failing to plan is planning to fail, and it's not like Babylon 5 didn't have to make story changes. The lead actor had to leave after season 1 due to ill health, and the writers had to rework the whole story. The difference is in the writers that they had. I don't intend to be mean, but this is the writing experience of Nicholas Adams, who writes for the Rings of Power. So on the Rings of Power, we have people in some cases with very little writing experience being led by people without a plan. Compare this to Babylon 5, where they had writers like DC Fontana, who before Babylon 5 had 35 writing credits, stretched over 33 years as a writer, wrote for loads of things including the original series of Star Trek, and was a woman by the way. The Rings of Power goes on about their female writers and directors like they're breaking new ground, but Star Trek beat them to it by 60 years. And I've never even heard people talking about Star Trek's female writers and directors. It just wasn't an issue because they got the job done. But if you're hiring people just to tick a box, and just because of what's between their legs and not their ability to get the job done, don't be surprised if the job doesn't get done. In the first question of the interview, we find out that the scene with Durin III jumping like a bow-legged goon at a massive fire demon for no reason, and then the show cutting away before we saw anything, that scene was apparently 5 years in the making. They spent 5 years planning that. I maybe could have given them some slack if they did it in an afternoon, but 5 years for that. The people that made Babylon 5 did 5 full seasons in 5 years. And this is also an issue for the timeline once again, because the Dwarven King who just got Balrogged was Durin III. In the Return of the King book, page 1406 in my version, the Balrog's supposed to appear in the timeline 3,400 years after Sauron made the One Ring. In the show, the Balrog has just appeared and the ring hasn't been made yet. They talk about the orc leader Adar putting on the elven ring and turning back into an elf, saying,
And then it's ironic, he's brought back to his beautiful elvish form, his immortal face, and ultimately it alienates him from his children. His children look at him and it's like, you're not our father anymore.
And that was nowhere in their show. If it happened off camera again. They seem to think that there was, quote, a moment where the elves and orcs could have been friends, and for half a second the ring could have brought that. And this is a problem with making up the story as you go along. You can't do this after what you did in season 1. You had the orcs attacking, enslaving and slaughtering elves, innocent human civilians, just on sight and blowing up a volcano. Where was the scope for them to ever be friends? When Adar in this season turned up at the elves' city wanting Sauron, you didn't write him sending a messenger to the elves asking for Sauron. You had him set siege to the city, send a message by carving it into an elf scout's corpse, and then demolish the city with trebuchets. Where was the scope for them to be friends? The writers don't seem to remember or know their own story. Not only are they not faithful to what Tolkien wrote, they're not even being faithful to what they wrote last season, when J.D. Payne says,
I really connect with him this moment of vulnerability for Sauron. We've been watching him try to connect over the course of the show. We get that he had this former boss, Morgoth, who had this vision of creating order in Middle-earth.
And there's just so much wrong with that sentence for me. By former boss, I guess you mean unknowable fallen dark god. Former boss makes him sound like Sauron was working in a Starbucks, and Morgoth didn't so much as try to bring order as destroy the world, both in the writing of Tolkien and quite awkwardly in your own show in season 1. This is Morgoth trying to bring order, is it? But I suppose thinking about it, Tolkien does seem to have taken quite a bit of inspiration from Christianity. In his writings, there's the character Eru Ilúvatar, who's, I suppose, kind of like the Christian god. I suppose Morgoth bears a certain resemblance to Lucifer in Milton's Paradise Lost. So maybe Morgoth is more like a fallen archangel than a dark god, and Sauron maybe more like a fallen angel. I had another horrible thought. The rings for men have been made now in the show, so Sauron is going to hand them out and make the ring wraiths, and if the showrunners are genuinely trying to destroy Tolkien's work, they will make Pharazôn's weasel of a son the Witch King of Angmar. The interviewer at one point asks them,
Unleashing the hill troll into the siege of a region also puts Adar on the outs with his troll leaders who say, you can't send him, he'll kill our guys as much as our enemies. Adar seems not to care.
And it didn't put Adar on the outs with the troll leaders, it was orc leaders, and the showrunners didn't even correct the question. The interviewer goes on, talking about Galadriel and her sword fight with Sauron, saying,
Watching that, I recalled in the Fellowship of the Ring where Frodo offers to give her his ring.
Now, I've mentioned before in my videos how in UK English, the word ring is frequently used slang for someone's bottom, specifically the hole in it. So when you say Frodo offers to give Galadriel his ring, I don't mean to be dirty, but I'm going to be, because it gives me visions of the Fellowship of the Ring movie in Lothlorien Forest, and seeing Samwise Gamgee happily walking into the forest clearing and saying, "Oh, Master Frodo," as he finds that Galadriel has bent Frodo over the magic mirror. They were asked how quickly season 3 would be coming, because there's an urgency caused by actors ageing, and they responded, "No one will remember when they got it. They'll only remember if it was good." Firstly, that kind of assumes that what you're making has been good, whereas what you're making has people coming back to life off camera. Also, I don't think that statement's even true. Many things in life are just time sensitive. Try it yourself. Try forgetting your partner's birthday or your wedding anniversary for 3 full months, then get them a good present and see if they don't care about when they got it and if they only remember that it was good.
If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.